On the other hand, Ariane Mishkin, French director, she enormously ambitious and has had huge resources allocated to her by the French government, especially after in the 1970s the government agreed to subsidize her theater, Théâtre du Soleil, the Theater of the Sun, and they had their own theater at the so-called Cartoucherie, which used to be an armory or arsenal where the French army kept weapons and mortars and cannons. And then when the army gave it up, the state turned it over to the city of Paris, and they gave it to Mishkin. It's a huge space. And she has an enormous budget to work with and a huge staff to support her, actors and whatnot. And they do really big productions, some lasting several hours, and often based on history. I asked you to look at the Agamemnon that she did, based on the ancient Greek myth, but it's not really Aeschylus. It's just, and it's not really ancient Greek myth because she puts in all of these other cultures and whatnot that comprise the performance. But she's been very innovative. She did one production on the French Revolution that involved multiple stages. There are 10 different stages. And spectators go into this huge space called the Cartoucherie, and there are the stages. It's like a big convention, a huge fair, and each stage represents a different moment or aspect of the French Revolution. The actors are dressed up in French revolutionary costumes, and they represent different sides of the revolution. The fanatical revolutionaries that said off with their heads to everybody that disagreed with them. Then the people trying to be, the Girondists trying to be middle of the road or more moderate. Let's be more reasonable about how we transform our country. And then you have the monarchists, the royalists who want to restore the monarchy and keep the society the way it was when the aristocracy was running all the institutions. You have all these different sides and different levels of society represented. Very poor people and business people and commercial people and school teachers and soldiers and diplomats and kings and whatnot. They're all strata, but they interact with each other across the stages. So one stage and another stage interact with each other at certain moments. Other times they're off in their own little world, their own little. Sometimes the actors playing the French Revolutionary character interact with the spectators, and the spectators are in dialogue with the actors. It is, however, a very physical kind of theater, expecting acrobatic kind of use of the body. She incorporates music, so singing and kind of choreographed movement. And then there are moments when things just stop and people give speeches, which often aren't really written out. They're sort of the synthesis or digestion of conversations that the company has had about the moment in the play when this happens and the content of it. Because for the most part, the productions, you have photo documentation but no scripts. And the plays constantly change. And they can change from night to night when the director will come to the night, Francois, I'm thinking about this one moment in your scene here, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, I just think something needs to be done differently. How about trying this and whatnot? And the performance changes. It's never stable. And that's a reason to see that you are seeing something that no one else is going to see because if they're not there to see it. And this notion of the relation, the present moment being so transitory and ephemeral, and our relation to history also being that way, is a major reason for being at the theater rather than some other kind of entertainment. So, as I said, with the Grotowski legacy of the director-driven strategy, you had this initial assertion of directorial authority in relation to opera, and then to classic plays generally. The Beck legacy and the directors I've mentioned here, like Mishkin and Cantor, their kind of approach sort of arose out of dance and very physical gymnastic kind of performance, things like cabaret, and also as a result of new kinds of technologies, visual technologies and digital media impacting on performance. So the body's relation to these technologies, to the image, needed dramatization than the authors seem to be able to provide. So that's the difference between the Beck direction and the Grotowski direction of the director-driven strategies. I do want you to look at those videos because I think they're significant in understanding this fundamental difference in the director culture. The Philippe Gentil videos about the mysterious puppet performances in Paris reveals a further dimension to the director kind of culture, insofar as it shows the sophistication in which performances that bring audiences to the theater seem built around this puppet master kind of approach to performance. Many have accused the directors of being the puppet masters. Philippe Gentil has a company which produces these mysterious and often very erotic kinds of puppet performances in which human beings can be seen interacting with puppets, and the direction of the puppets is by humans, but the humans themselves seem guided by this greater power that's within himself, and it creates a kind of aura of performance that no video seems to convey adequately, even though it's very alluring and very seductive. But Gentil's use of this kind of double figures in performance, the puppet and the human figure, has opened up a sense of the possibilities of theater that seem to have been closed off during the era of realism and recovered from an earlier time when puppetry had this kind of mystery and wasn't just, children's kind of stuff. So he represents a really interesting embodiment of this director's strategy. And Johann Kresnik is involved with what the Germans call Tanztheater or dance theater, where the difference between dance and theater gets blurred. It's not clear. They don't have, but it's not choreographed in the way that ballet or modern dance conventionally is. It emerges out of these kinds of collaborations that I was talking about. And Pina Bausch is the greatest of the Tanztheater exponents. She died recently, just a couple of years ago. Just a great figure in the realm of performance, as far as putting speech into dancing bodies and redefining dance and making dance more theatrical and theater more dance-like, and building these enormous dance productions which was primarily interested in how gender identity, male and female identities, get shaped by societal pressures, and how the body resists those pressures or submits to them. And she did a lot of gender bending in her huge dance pieces, such as women on high heels carrying men in a dance, like a ballet dance position, or men in tutus carrying women dressed like men, and this kind of thing. I mean, she used to litter the stage with all kinds of debris to dramatize the obstacles to the free-moving body. She'd put water on the stage, and one of them, Nelken carnations. The stage is covered with carnations. They dance with all these flowers on the stage. In another dance, there's a body emerges out of a giant crocodile body, and she did all these stunts, people in these huge dives off of high positions and being caught by people, or doing something really stunning with a simple action like skipping rope, and having a dancer, two dancers turning the rope, and another dancer skipping in the rope, and then making this increasingly complicated, involving other bodies joining the body in the skip rope, and male and female, and doing increasingly acrobatic movements within the simple movement of skipping, of the turning rope. But it's actually very difficult. And the expectation of performance, she wanted to critique this audience expectation that the performance should be ever greater than the previous performance in terms of what we want from the performers. It's a pressure on performers to be ever more expressive, ever more powerful in the way they move and gesture and dance and speak, and she wanted to expose through these huge monumental performances how the audience expectations have been shaped by a culture greater than the world that's brought them together, the performers and the spectators in the theater. So Pina Bausch remains one of the great figures of the contemporary or postmodern theater culture. As I say, collaboration was new forms of collaboration were necessary to create this non-scripted kind of performance, which could reach monumental dimensions in Ariane Mishkin and Tadeusz Kantor and Pina Bausch. The nature of those collaborations remains largely mysterious. They've not been documented as well as the performances themselves, which is unfortunate, but it should be considered part of the performance in some sense if we're to understand the overall achievement of this director-centered kind of theater. From my perspective, director-centered theater is primarily about concentrations of power. It's about the way in which a personality gets others to do his or her will. Previously, we had entrusted that to an author whose authority to tell us what to do, seems sanctified by all this institutional apparatus about literature and good writing and the appropriate process for evaluating the writing and whatnot. But in this more collaborative kind of director-centered theater, it's about how a personality gets many people to do something more complicated than what a single author could do. And it's supposedly done on behalf of a more democratic way of creating theater, but in reality these collaborative processes entail a director who casts a kind of spell over the actors and all those who work within the theater that the director, to which the director belongs. Arion Mishkin is always talking about creating a more democratic theater, a more theater for people and dealing with people's lives, and about how all citizens of France need to find their place in the theater that she creates. And she conducts these dialogues with her staff and the actors about what should they produce next, and it goes on. But when you read reports and even some transcripts of these collaborations, it's clear that she's in control. And it's what she wants to do that gets done. And the dialogue is a way of, it's more like a CEO with people around her who are her advisors. And she is not one that's very patient with those who are doubtful of her enterprise or even all that questioning. And that was the case with Grotowski and with Beck. They talked about in their performances creating a freer society, a more democratic society, where more voices are involved in making the decisions. But when you examine more carefully the circumstances under which their kind of theater emerged, a more complex story also emerges, and it's not one that really involves the practice of democracy, at least as it's taught in civics classes or some kind of idealized high school course on politics and so forth. And perhaps I'll talk about that in a later video and to talk a little bit more detail about that. But enough for now.